the 29th of November, donks, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome live inside our New York City studios. I am the host of this program. My name is Luke Thomas. I'm from SiriusXM as well as MMAFighting.com. We are a trio today. I'm going to carry these two to my left. The first is Danny Segura from MMAFighting.com. I'm in a mood today. Yeah. And at the very end is the man in the hat. You know him from The Ringer as well as MMAFighting.com. The Iceman himself, Chuck Mindenhall. I told you that before. You're Iceman in my phone. Yeah. And I cannot remember why I called you that.
I'm not sure. Chuck, maybe? I don't know.
Oh, that must be what it is. Yeah, from Chuck Liddell. Yeah. Stupid me. Who we will talk about.
I thought you were kidding.
No, I'm just brain damaged. Okay. We'll talk about Chuck and Tito a little bit later in the show. There's actually a ton of stuff happening in the combat sports world. Don't forget, we take your questions using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We have selected some. We'll answer them at the end of the show, but keep those firing at all times because we do go back retroactively and look at some of the better ones. So thank you for all of those. All right, boys, let's get this going. How we doing post-Thanksgiving?
Doing good.
Finally got the hangover over?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, very good.
Cleared that. Yeah.
Cleared it, yes?
Yeah.
Very good. Me too. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about to start things off. Jon Jones came to New York City and did the car wash. Well, I guess he went to ESPN, so Connecticut too. But did the car wash with First Take. He went on our former colleague Ariel Helwani's show. God, what else did he do? He went on UFC Unfiltered podcast. He somehow skipped my shows. I don't know why.
Any big shows?
Yeah, I can't figure out how he missed that one. But in any event, so he did a bunch of stuff. I got a few questions about it. The first one's sort of a real basic one. Danny, I'll start with you. I went and watched all of that stuff because I was really kind of curious about it. How did he sound to you? This was sort of his first real public, I'm going to get out here, I'm going to answer these questions. He had done some stuff privately with a few outlets here or there, but this was the first time he went and just spoke to the media.
Yeah.
How'd he sound to you?
The vibe that I got from him was kind of the same vibe that we got from his UFC 214 post-fight conference, where he was just very accepting of who he is. He's no longer trying to put up a front or trying to put up a certain image of who he is. He's just like, look, I drink sometimes, I smoke pot sometimes, this is who I am, this is what I do. Now I'm trying to, keep everything measured and make sure, I stay out of trouble, but, this is who I am. Seemed a lot more comfortable with himself, seemed a lot more comfortable with the criticism of the fan base that's been out there, hating on him. He just seemed all around just a more comfortable, human being with the position that he's currently in, the job that he currently has ahead of him. And that's good. That's good to see in a fighter. You don't want to be so worried about what's going on out there and things that you can't control. He's just worried about what he can control. So that's kind of the gauge that I got from him.
Yeah, it feels like he spent his time somewhat introspectively. I think he actually, at some point, now he's went through several of these processes where he's been, been out of action and out of the spotlight. I feel like this particular time, maybe some of the things he finally processed to the point where he's like, you know what, man, I'm done trying to be duplicitous, or I'm done trying to be two things. I want to be one thing. And that's what it strikes me as. It seems like he wants to be who he is now. He wants that to be the public thing, because a lot of the things that got him in trouble, going back to the earliest things with the Rashad Evans relationship and everything, was just kind of the two-faced Jon Jones. Which side are you talking to? Are you talking to the pastor's son over here who's, has a halo on his head? Or are you talking to the guy who's out partying every weekend and doing crazy things? And I think he's finally saying, like, I am who I am. I think he wants to be this guy, but he is this guy. And he was basically communicating that. He was saying, this is where I'm at right now. And honestly, he was so self-assessing and so pinpoint as to that sort of thing. It was almost unnerving. That's how it struck me. But at the same time, I think that he, over that course of time, I think that it seemed to me like he has thought a great deal about how he wants to be going forward. And that's what we were saying.
What did you make of Max Kellerman's pushback on First Take?
I didn't get to see the whole thing.
You didn't see that?
I didn't see the whole thing.
Basically, there was a question like
about the steroids, right?
Yeah, and they weren't unfair questions. Yeah, but they were basically like, he was trying to explain, the steroids in my system, and Max Kellerman was like, well, how did they end up there? Right. And he tried to give the explanation that we've all heard. We test everything, we don't really know. And then Max doubled down, and Max was like, right, so imagine you're someone else watching TV, and an athlete says, you don't know how you got into your system. It's like, this is now not the same offense, but multiple offenses with anti-doping authorities. What conclusion would you draw? I never found him to have a good answer, but at the same time, I never found him troubled by the line of questioning either, for whatever that is worth. I don't know exactly what that means.
It was really interesting because I did see the part you're talking about. And it's interesting when anybody does that, because Jon Jones, if nothing else, I feel like Max Kellerman framed it in a way that I think Jon Jones doesn't usually consider. How does it look? You know what I'm saying? Like
his
point. Stuff is usually stuff that he wants to out there or whatever, but he doesn't contemplate fully how does it look. So I felt like that's what it was a little cringeworthy, honestly, when he was trying to explain it. The pinch, that was the whole pinch of salt in the Olympic-sized swimming pool and all that stuff. From the outside, that seems so like. I don't know how the steroids, you know, you hear that stuff and I think that that's inherent with doubt. Like you hear that and you think like, okay, man, you know, but,
look, I've said this before. I don't know what the truth is anymore. I'm not even sure I care.
Yeah.
But on the surface of it, it's if you're Max, his point is like, dude, you got to come on my terms here. It sounds so implausible. You know?
Right.
Yeah. I think that's what he's trying to drive at.
I think that Jon Jones he's trying to deal with it. Obviously, those situations, I think we were making the point beforehand that he's a lot more comfortable with the national media, the guys who are like doing, you know, MMA is just a side thing that they talk about. So he's much more comfortable with those types of people. And it struck me that he felt like he was having a private conversation, honestly. And I can appreciate each iteration of Jon Jones. Each time he comes back, I feel like we're seeing a little bit turn of the screw. We're seeing a little bit more of what he's becoming, and it's really fascinating, man, because he still stands at that line of being the Michael Jordan of our sport, and I think that you see him wanting to be there, and you see people wanting to put him there, but they can't. So we're always straddling that line. I think it's just been really fascinating through this whole process now.
We've seen Jon Jones get bothered by, you know, questions before. And with this one, it was obviously pushing back on that touchy subject, and he felt pretty comfortable talking about it. He did his explanation. I think at one point he said something like, "Oh, in my mind and in spirit, I know that I've never, you know, cheated in the sport of MMA." And he gave his explanation. He was just like, "Yeah, well, that's that. You sought to prove me innocent." And, you know,
yeah, I mean, they framed it like you sought to prove me innocent, which isn't exactly what they said. But at the same point, he seems like, look, here's what the truth is, whether I can convince you or not.
Yeah. Look, that's what he was basically saying.
This is going to be what it's going to be. Now, the bigger question, and you had alluded to it, Danny, so I'll go back to you on this one, was he had acknowledged that he's basically not sober. Mm-hmm. We know that through, I believe it was the initial USADA arbitrators report, that it was revealed that he had gone to do some pretty extensive inpatient rehab, and he had revealed that, look, he tried to do it. That was a beneficial chapter in his journey to this point. But that, you know, look, he kind of still drinks on the weekends and he kind of smokes pot. The way he had framed it was, am I doing what I was doing before? No. Yeah. Am I sober? No. Okay. I said this on my radio show. I wonder how you feel about it, Danny. My position, and I'll expand on it later after I hear what you have to say, my position is, insofar as in this new chapter, whatever he's doing in his private life doesn't interfere with what happens in the cage or his ability to get to the cage, it is none of my business. I do not care. I cannot possibly care. Where do you come down on this admission? I completely agree. I mean, if it's not affecting his career and he's got everything in order in his life and his career, and all those things are not keeping him from going in the cage and proving that, you know, he's one of the best in the world, if not the best, who cares? Just as long as, you know, he's not out there getting in trouble. Yeah. I didn't find that to be, you know, a big issue. And, you know, a lot of fighters these days, even like Sean O'Malley, you know, they're open. Even the Diaz brothers, they're open about their usage of marijuana. And, you know, Jon Jones is no different. Tons of fighters do. So, I wonder to what extent those guys being kind of cult figures in the sport for doing that maybe plays a role in him saying, like, you know what, man, why am I hiding this sort of thing? It's work to hide that. Yeah. It's work to put on a different identity. But going back to your original thing, so I agree with you 100%. It should, if it doesn't mess with his career, why should we care? You know, but to this point, it has. Right. To this point, it has. And it's like, so that's why the admission is like, okay, he's still partying. Like, there's still because his problem always was that he liked to have a good time, right? Like, so it's like he's still doing that. Maybe he's got it more under control. Maybe, who knows? But at the same time, you can't help but hear a red flag to some extent, you know, or see a red flag to some extent, because you're like, you know, if you're talking about anybody who's alcohol abuse or anything, they've been through the types of things, DUIs, all that sort of thing, and they're still doing it. Obviously, you're going to pay attention to that. I mean, so it's a natural
it's a natural thing to raise a red flag in this situation, but at the same time, I'm with you. Because you have to clean the slate at some point again. If we're giving him another shot, you have to. And as long as it doesn't interfere with anything going forward, I don't really care. I mean, it would be hypocritical for any of us or any athlete out there.
I'm barely sober now.
So, we'll see how it goes, but it's startling to hear somebody say that.
Yes.
But there was also a little bit of like, okay, Jon Jones is talking about it in a different way now.
Yeah.
Let's see if this is better for him to be more open with this situation.
You bring up an interesting point, but I do think there's something to say about, the fact that before he was hiding it and trying to put on a certain image, and now he's just very comfortable with it and sort of, not embraces it, but just, he's comfortable about talking these things. So it kind of indicates that he is at a better place, and he's in understanding with everything that's going on around.
It's funny that we're kind of approaching this Gustafsson fight when the first Gustafsson fight, remember, he was like, I was still partying, I still beat you and all this. And it's funny that we've come all this time, we've done this full circle thing, and he's basically admitting he's partying still to an extent. To what extent, who knows? Going into the rematch 5 years later. What a weird thing. But I feel like we're looking at a whole different Jon Jones.
Yeah.
Even though in essence it's the same guy.
And the truth is, look, I think what this issue speaks to is to what degree of forgiveness or leniency do each individual person wish to grant him in their degree of skepticism. I think any degree of skepticism is probably okay, or at least having some is okay. It's just for me, and again, if you're a fan and you're skeptical of what he's saying, I can't really argue with you. Mm-hmm. As a media member, my issue is sitting up here and saying to someone, you got to live a certain way. No. If people knew how I lived, oh my God, I'd be getting, people would be legitimately concerned for my health, right? But no one does because I have good risk management and it doesn't really interfere with my professional responsibilities insofar as anybody can really tell. To your point, that hasn't been the case. But here's my other point. When you hear him talk, and I thought the best interview that happened all week, I'll give him credit, was the UFC Unfiltered podcast. If you have not heard Jon Jones in the UFC Unfiltered podcast, wow. He could not have been more relaxed the entire time. But insofar as that is concerned, the reason I'm willing to grant a degree of leniency is because I'm very hesitant to be like,
yeah, of course.
And the other one is, dude, the guy people are like, Jon's been let off on so many things. At the same time, the guy has missed 3 years of his prime.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, he has also been, he is, people can say whatever they want. Maybe he didn't get maximum punishment each time, but accumulatively, the dude's been through the ringer a little bit.
Yeah.
If he doesn't have perspective now, he never will, but I'm at least willing to concede, maybe he's got some now. Maybe, right? And I think in that space, that's why I want to forgive a little bit.
I mean, nobody has, it's unparalleled what he's compromised, what he could have earned. The people around him, his coaches right now, who knows if these guys are, at what point they're still in the game or why they care. You know what I mean? Like, all of them, he affected a lot of people's family and his own bank account, his coaches, everybody around him. So it's one of those type of things, man. If anybody like looks at it from a whole, you're like, dude, this guy has done, I wouldn't say irreparable damage to his career because he can still do what he wants to do because he's still young enough. But it's like he has done himself major harm to this point.
You can't deny that. Just the fact that he lost the Nike sponsorship deal, just the fact that, the guy who he beat twice, right? He's watching him go on to, become a champ, fight for the heavyweight belt, and all these. So for sure, Jon Jones has taken some hits, but he has enough time to face that for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to challenge people who are like, oh, Jon's always gotten off. It's like, well, and there's a lot of circumstances where it could have been worse.
Yeah,
but there's been so many circumstances that it just adds up to a lot.
Well, when they mentioned on his last event, it's like 4 years, he could be gone 4 years. People planted that in their brain, and I never thought it would be 4 years.
Never. We discussed that on this show.
Exactly. So it's like, it's one of those things I think that people are like, because he didn't do that long of a time, like people think that he's getting off.
By the way, did you hear what he said on the UFC Unfiltered podcast about his sponsorship? There was a time he was making just in sponsors, $100,000 a month.
Wow.
1.2 mil.
Sounds nice.
Cool money, bro.
See, now we'd be partying if we made that kind of
and at 28 or 6 years old, are you kidding?
You're absolutely right.
I would just be drunk 24/7. All right.
Snorting up the sidewalks.
I mean, like it was nobody's business. You understand that? All right. So let's move on from that for just a minute, and we'll go to, I want to change the order. So for the boys in the back, Let's jump to the Sage Northcutt issue that has been brewing. Save for a second the Akiyama news for just a minute, and of course the Caldwell Rise and stuff. Just put that out of your mind. I don't want to have a broader discussion about that. I do want to talk about Sage specifically going. It's not confirmed that he's going to 1, but you got Chatri Sityodtong.
Mr. Chatri.
Yeah, Mr. Sityodtong. And you've got Sage Northcutt sending love tweets back and forth. It's like, feels like it's a foregone conclusion at this point. Okay, fine. Chuck, Dana White had framed it as, the guy needs more experience, and so we let him go. I don't think that that's the truth. It appears that that's not the truth. There are now reports. I mean, it was always pretty obvious that was never really the case. But here's the bigger question. How did Sage end up in the position that he's in now?
Well, I mean...
And I'm not asking for a recitation of events. I'm asking for a sort of a lesson.
Well, I think he's got some people around him who are protecting his best interests, for sure. I think, I don't think he's naive either as we all make him out to be all the time with his golly stuff. I think that he knows what he's doing. He's got good advisors around him. The truth of the matter is the guy has won, his last 3 fights, right? And where our big knock on him was like, well, he hasn't won a welterweight. His last fight was at welterweight, and he looked very good. To me, he's looked like he's making the kind of leaps and bounds that he needs to for, 22 years old. He's right where he probably should be. Maybe he started off in the UFC too early. But I'm like, to me, he looks like he's right where he is. And I think, I don't know the full details, but it just seems like they position themselves to be in a situation where they could see how much he could get in this, 22 years old, make the money. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's exactly what they did. It was a little surprising because I even did like a faux kind of trade thing earlier in the year for Ringer. And I said, trade Sage Northcutt over for I forget who, but I was like, I thought he was kind of a UFC commodity, really. Like I thought they had a guy who they could keep growing. And at some point, you never know. I was a little surprised, but, I know we were talking about this, at another point. If somebody wants to overpay Sage Northcutt, let him do it. At the same time, I think if he goes to 1 championship, I think that's a perfect place for him. And if he can cash in, man, at 22 years old, I don't know how long. Guys like that, I'm not sure how long they'll want to even
starting at 19?
Yeah. How long are they going to be in the fight game? He might be done at 25. Yeah. So go make the money.
Yeah. I don't buy everything that Dana has said regarding Sage, but I do think there is some truth to that in the sense of the UFC is looking for stars that can become stars quickly. Say like a Cody Garbrandt who went from unranked to champ in a year's calendar. Israel Adesanya who's been fighting this year and all of a sudden, he's got this fight with Anderson Silva, which we'll talk about later on, and all of a sudden he's in big title contention status. You can say the same thing for Conor McGregor. In a year's calendar, he was already knocking on the door and making big waves. Sage Northcutt never really had that. I mean, he's gotten better. Don't get me wrong. He's improved, especially since his move to Team Alpha Male. But he's never really become this title contender. He's never really put on performances that you go, geez, this guy might fight for the title pretty soon. He's kind of, I don't want to say plateaued, but he's had a growth, but perhaps not as rapid as the UFC likes it to be nowadays with, because this is a star-driven business. So I do think there's some truth to that. That's probably in part because he's so young still that he's probably really far away from his peak, but we'll never know when his peak will come. Time will tell. But I think the UFC was banking that it would come somewhat quick, and it just hasn't. And I feel like there is some truth to that. Like, hey, go get some experience outside the UFC. Because, he does have an expensive contract compared to what other fighters have in the UFC. So
yeah, I know. Everyone's like, we said this before the show too. It's like, Sage is overpaid. No, Sage is paid. Sage is probably underpaid. It's just that everyone else is so underpaid that it looks like he's getting some kind of an extra deal. So the question for the table is, whoever wants to grab it, did he make the right call? And I'm going to ask you in these terms: what happened to UFC prestige that a contract that's probably not significantly greater in money, I'm not going to say marginally, but probably, whatever X is, it's not 2X he's making in one, right? What happened to UFC prestige that a somewhat greater monetary deal is enough to pull them away? What happened to that? That's an interesting dynamic.
That's a good question, yeah.
I mean, you hear this a lot in the last year or two. Just it's not the same as it once was. I think that there was a prestige that you're talking about. There was an ultimate goal of ending up in the UFC. And I don't know if it's the Conor McGregor factor. I don't know where the paradigms began to shift, but there's a lot of people. Maybe it was Ben Askren, maybe, multiple, you could look at it from any way you want, but I think certain people showed you know, maybe that's not the sport. Maybe it's not about making the UFC. Maybe it's just about making money. It's prize fighting. Maybe at some point that becomes the highest thing you want to achieve, is to get paid what you think you're worth. And I think that we've seen that with quite a few fighters. I just don't know if it has the same. Those letters used to be everything, right, in the sport, especially even a few years ago. But I'm not sure it really has the same import now.
Yeah, and also with all the interim titles that have been implemented, there's been, you know, some devaluation to the real UFC belt. You know, being a UFC champion no longer means exactly the same what it used to be, you know, years ago. So a guy like Sage Northcutt, you know, 22, 23, looks at that and goes, you know, I can continue my dream. I can continue doing what I love, pursuing my martial arts passion, and get paid more. And look, Dana White didn't really close the door on him. He said, you know, maybe we'll pick him up later. So for a guy that's that young and has those,
a lot of times I think that they look at the UFC as a complicated ordeal now.
It is,
There's so many complications on the back end that you deal with that you probably don't deal with. That like
high friction.
100%. And you feel like a lot of that business aspect really bleeds over into the public these days. And I think that, like, you talk to guys from PFL, for instance, they're just relieved because it's a very straightforward thing they're doing. They're going to fight in the season, going to fight in the tournament, they're going to try to win $1 million. It's a very straightforward thing. And if anything,
they get sponsors on the uniforms.
Stripped down basically to its basics. It's become more basic again. I think there's a lot of people who want that again, man. There's just some people who want to fight. They want to be able to make the money that they think they're worth while they can do it. The UFC has probably gotten more complicated over time. I mean, we've talked about it a million times, the Reebok deal, everything that goes into it. You know, just trying to get a fight. A lot of times you hear guys just grousing because they can't get a fight. You know what I mean? Their placement, everything else. So I think it's just, at this point, I think that the UFC is complicated compared to other places.
Also, I think the fight game has just gotten smarter overall and has looked at the health aspects, right? Of, you know, going into a fight and what that means and what you're putting your body through. So if you can fight lesser competition for an equal amount of money or more, you know, it's ultimately helpful.
Ben Askren basically forgave anybody for wanting to do that, right? He was like, hey, I don't care what you think about it. I'm going to go get paid and fight these guys. There's no names that you're talking about. I'm going to go beat them and make more money than I would in the UFC.
And the Ben and the Sage, like, bookends are important here because it's an important signing that one, again, assuming that he goes to one.
Yeah.
But it's an important signing because it's still, as big as it is, it still doesn't quite challenge. Like, we're talking about a decline in UFC prestige, but not a total abandonment of it. You've got guy in pre-prime, Sage. You've got guys I would consider post-prime in Alvarez, DJ, and Ben Askren. Some people think post-prime is a slight. It's not. What I'm saying is, are they at the very peak of their abilities? Probably not. Still very, very, very good fighters who can beat elite guys. I'm just saying they're not at the highest point in their career. In any case, so you still don't get the guys right in that center. Like, no one's being like, I'm going to spend my prime not fighting in the UFC if given the option. That's pretty rare. Maybe like a Michael Chandler.
Right.
But even then, he's still trying to find the toughest challenges that are out there. So that dynamic is still in play. But at the margins, things are changing a little bit. I actually think, and I mentioned this earlier in the week as well, I actually think that's a pretty good thing for MMA. It's like, what's the best world? Where Sage gets all the money in the world and keeps fighting the UFC? Okay, yes. But that's not the one we live in. The one we live in is where that didn't happen. So you have, again, ostensibly this news. You had confirmed today Yoshihiro Akiyama signing with one. Our friend at Bloody Elbow, John Nash, made a point. You've got all this DAZN money coming into Bellator, and you had an additional $166 million raised in venture capital by one. I don't know how much these two organizations make, but they certainly raise a lot of money. If now is the time to fight out your contract if you want to get paid.
Yeah.
Plus, the UFC is not even stopping these guys anymore.
I know.
This is a great period for growth outside of the UFC. For organizations, I think, and fighters alike.
Yeah.
Any final comment on that?
Something I want to add to your comment was that the UFC is still the number one organization, no question. But it is the home for those elite fighters who are fighting, you know, who are at the top of their careers, right? A guy like Sage might benefit more going elsewhere and picking up experience and fighting lower level guys where he can develop skills rather than staying in the UFC and fight, you know, high level opposition. Same thing with the guys on the other end of that bell curve. You know, DJ or Eddie Alvarez, you know, getting older, still very good fighters, but could go down to another organization and, you know, be better fits for other organizations.
I mean, for Sage to go over there, I don't know what his whole deal. Do you know the terms of his? I guess it isn't even official in the.
Yeah.
But if he goes over there and he fights for a couple years and he gets wins, he only increases his value when he comes back anyway. Yeah. So I think it's just for him, his age, when you're just coming up like that. It feels like a smart.
I mean, maybe this is on the high end, but let's just say he gets $250 a fight, right? $250K. You fight 3 times a year, $750K. Plus, you probably can amass, I don't know, another 100,000 or more in sponsors. We're talking about $1 million a year, nearly, for a guy at 22 years old. You'd be a dumbass to pass that up.
Exactly right. When you look at it like that, that's what I'm trying to say. Like it's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? For a guy like that, you're 22 years old. I'm sure his dad is involved in the stuff. I mean, he's got people around him who are.
And he has such a positive energy, I think, wherever he goes. People are always like, I feel good about wherever he is. Yeah. Good about his show, good about that organization. It carries over a little bit with that. All right, so the other, do I want to get into it now? I kind of do, like, really quickly. I mentioned there's growth outside of MMA, outside of UFC. Just before we got on the show today, it was announced in the morning that Ryzen is going to allow, and Bellator, I should say, is going to allow. This is not on the lower thirds, boys in the back. Sorry, we didn't get this in. Bellator bantamweight champ Darian Caldwell, 2-time national champion of NC State Wolfpack, heading over to Ryzen 14. That's the New Year's Eve show that Floyd is going to fight on. He's going to be facing Kyoji Horiguchi, essentially their flyweight champ. I gotta say,
bantamweight. He's a bantamweight champ. No?
Is he now?
Yeah.
Well, he's a natural flyweight. I mean, Darian Caldwell is significantly better. I believe he has a 6-inch reach advantage and a 5-inch height advantage. Yeah. Like,
besides that, it's even.
Yeah, maybe he is. I could be totally wrong. If I am, it's fine. But we're not talking about two people who are naturally the same size. That's not what this is. All right. Anyway, no matter what, this is, I think, just phenomenal. I'm so happy that Ryzen is doing this. I take my hat off to Bellator. Yes, they've got a bigger guy going over who's, and wrestling centric. So it's a little bit stacked in their favor, but he's the one making the trip to Japan. He's the one fighting in the king's backyard, so to speak. And I just find this cooperation amazing. So you've got this growth happening with all this money, this venture capital money, plus this new seemingly cooperative spirit. Yeah. How much of a new age, or I should say a return to what it used to be, where premier talent had important fights outside of the UFC? Is it just what we're kind of looking at now, or do you think we can actually really achieve something here in this new phase?
It reminds me of the 2003 Chuck Liddell thing, going over to Pride and the Overeem and Quentin Jackson and all that stuff. Like that was fun, like when you think back on that stuff. So this struck me as like fun, but you look at Scott Coker, I feel like he's always open-minded into how to break into markets, how to conjoin, how to make the money, how to put his guys in the spotlights. Caldwell especially is one of those guys who should be, I think, people should be talking about him like we talk about some of the great bantamweights in the UFC, but we barely mention him. The guy's fought, I think, 3 or 4 of his fights in Thackerville, Oklahoma. He's fought in Mulvane, Kansas. You know what I mean? He's always on these like little regional cards. He fought in, Hidalgo, Texas. Mm-hmm. He's always on these cards. This is a very cosmopolitan move to put him over in like someplace like Japan and give him a spotlight against a guy that everybody knows, Horiguchi, is a tough guy, and showcase that guy a little bit. And I love it when the partition comes down. I've always liked it when two guys who can't come together suddenly can, and they can all of a sudden fight, and they're still representing their organizations and stuff like that. I mean, it just adds spice, and that's one of the things the fight game can do. So I love it. I hope we do see more of that type of thing. But for this particular fight, I was so out of left field. Yeah, I was immediately warm to it. You know what I mean? I was like, wow, who would have ever contemplated those two guys going at it?
Yeah, it's super nice because at the end of the day, like, we're here to see who the best fighter is, right? And organizations sometimes don't allow that because they're only allowed to fight with, fighters are only allowed to compete within those organizations. So now that these two, are making a deal where, it's a champ versus champ super fight, that's technically what it is. Yeah. It's awesome. And, it's also fun seeing, like, for example, a Chuck Liddell, who you're used to seeing with the cage and, the UFC graphics package all of a sudden being a white canvas, completely different scenario. Here's kind of the same thing. We're used to seeing Caldwell under this, Bellator banner, now crossing over to Ryzen. I kind of got the same feeling when King Mo jumped over to the heavyweight Grand Prix at Ryzen. It's fun. It's exciting. Plus, at least speaking personally, I tend to watch less of the MMA shows that, are happening in that time zone, just out of the simple fact that, they're off at a different time. you know, and then when you get crossovers like that, it kind of pushes you to go watch a different product, go watch different fighters. So
it also has that zany spirit of the old Japanese, like, New Year's shows. Like, they always had some crazy things going on in that show, right? So this, to me, fits the bill of the traditional thing that they were trying to build back in the Pride days and everything else. So that aspect of it too. I mean, you know, there is a part when you're like, how long can Japan kind of, I know they've been rolling again. The Ryzen's been, you know, moving slowly, but it's nice to see it get like a kickstart like that, you know, to get something really going where people pay attention from over here, because that's what Pride had.
Make New Year's Eve great again.
Exactly. That's what it is.
That's what it used to be.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, something more of an approximation to get there. To your point, it's like, you know, the UFC puts up all these partitions and you get it because they have 80% or upwards of that, 85% of the world's elite talent. And then you see all these other organizations like, oh, we're going to do the same thing. But you can't. You can't live siloed to silo to silo. You're just not serving your fan base. You have to be protective of your roster.
Yeah.
But I like the exchange here. I think both sides get something out of it.
There's never, and Scott Coker run business structure, there's never a future in terms of this guy's fighting this guy and then therefore and then probably face this guy. There's never that, like, we're not always trying to figure out what comes next, right? So in that way, Strikeforce never were like that. Two guys would fight and you didn't know what that meant for either guy. They were just going to fight. That's what you knew. The essence was on the fight itself. It had nothing to do with what came out of it. I feel like in that spirit, this is very Scott Coker too, to be like, hey, I don't, you know, we got a champion going over there. If he wins their belt, you know, who knows? Who knows?
Happens,
yeah, exactly. We'll see what happens. I kind of like, it's like, you know, it's like being in Vegas and rolling dice or something. You don't know what's going to happen. So it's fun.
I love it. I love the risk. I love the reward, or the potential reward anyway. All right, so let's jump to something else in the rundown. Namely, we're coming off of a weekend that was a little bit sad. It was Thanksgiving, but I'm not sure how much thanks was given for this one. Chuck and Tito fought. Chuck Liddell and Tito Ortiz for the third time. There's a million questions that have been asked about this. It's almost been talked about to death, but I have to tell you, I still find thinking about these issues massively important. I have a big belief that in MMA, whether it's a fighter in a fight and a corner is not stopping it, all the way up to a fighter themselves telling themselves they can keep going, all the way to a regulator saying, well, I don't want to take away someone's business opportunity to make money for themselves. We have a hard time saying no in MMA, really hard time. And I don't want to be...
Somebody's always willing to say yes.
Someone always wants to say yes to anything. Hey, what about no rules? Sure. What about eye gouges? Great. There's just never enough check or pulling back on things. But that's not how I want to start this conversation. Danny, I'll go with you first. Now that we've had some time to digest it and it's past us, when you think about that fight, what do you consider to be the most important takeaway from it?
Well,
there's a lot of them.
There's tons, yeah. I mean, right off the bat is obviously that Chuck Liddell shouldn't be fighting after, because there was, you know, questions going into the fight. What if, you know, he's had time to recover? You know, what if he looks differently? But, you know, we found out what we already knew, and it's that Chuck Liddell shouldn't be fighting. And I think there needs to be questions asked about, you know, the way the Legends division is going on, because that's certainly something that's been popping up when all these older stars are getting older. And when we put a limit to that. And I feel like we found that out, you know, with Chuck and Tito, because I think there's some fights that, you know, you can still let go, that are fighters, you know, fighting past their prime, but, you know, up to a certain line, you gotta say stop. And, you know, there's promoters that want to do it. There's the fighter itself that wants to do it. Commissions, you know, will regularly sometimes approve these as this one. But I think, you know, we got to start asking bigger questions, as you said.
And there are so few graceful outs. We've talked about this a million times. I think these guys who, especially a guy like Chuck Liddell, guys like BJ Penn, who are the boom era, like they basically were the guys right when MMA was starting to get recognized. Chuck Liddell was the first guy to be on ESPN, the magazine's cover. He was doing all that stuff back in the day. Painting his nails, the mohawk, the tattoo. He was a brand. Icon. He was the original icon, right? So I feel like for guys like that, they you know, in his brain, he just wants that to keep going. And it's like everybody else, going back to 2010 when he was fighting Rich Franklin, it was supposed to be Tito Ortiz in that UFC 115, I think it was. You know, man, it's just going all the way back then. Everybody knew that it was over for him. That fight was kind of a favor from Dana White to say, like, all right, I'm going to give you one last try. It was kind of couched that way, like, we're going to give you one last try. And if not, you think you should retire. He was saying that stuff. and you see him get knocked out by Rich Franklin's offhand. And I remember just thinking, like, gosh, how sad. It basically gave you the exact same feeling, but fast forward 8 years of added pathetic, whatever you want to say, like, that's how this felt. It felt like you were watching something that was so unnecessary. It was like everybody's worst case scenario, really. It was like a Golden Boy putting on their first event, drawing eyes to themselves, and for first MMA event, and you get a guy who the basic fear, the basic suspicion is exactly what it plans out to be exactly what everybody thought it would be. And there's not even a moment, I mean, in the very first exchange, you're just like, oh my God, this is not good. The whole thing to me, I was just like, man, it just seemed completely unnecessary and makes you just don't want to see stuff like that anymore. I don't know to what extent you cannot, because it's been ongoing in the fight game for 100 years. There have been guys who've come back, shells of themselves just to get either more money, payday, they're broke again, or they're trying to recapture some glory that it's impossible for them to get. And it's just it leaves you in a situation where you watch an event where there's really no happy outcome possible.
You know what's amazing? It's like I had, and I give credit, man. Nevada and their commissioners, frankly, I find their behavior cowardly. They won't speak to the media unless it's the most pleasant of circumstances. New Jersey will talk to people on occasion. I give a ton of credit to Andy Foster. Went out there and spoke to MMA Fighting. Yep. I had him on my show. I spoke to Bloody Elbow and probably other outlets as well. Like, nobody does that. And every time he had to go there and eat a shit sandwich. Like, it must have been awful to do that. I give him all the respect in the world. And he has a role to play here. But the interesting thing is, like, why is no one talking about his team or his coach?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, like, Antonio McKee is not some rube. Right. He's literally one of the best. I frankly think, in terms of like his strategy and his ability to game plan, he might be one of the best coaches that no one considers one of the best coaches.
100%.
He knows that guy, or maybe he doesn't. Like, for example, there was a guy, I won't say which legend it was. I interviewed his coach prior to one of his previous fights, and the coach was like, "Oh my God, you're going to see this dude's back, blah 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 blah," and it was horrible. It was horrible. I will no longer speak to that guy, not because I think necessarily he was lying to me. Either he was lying to me, or he just can't recognize the facts. Right. Either way, talking to you is not fruitful.
It's dangerous too.
It is super dangerous
for guys.
Why are we not? Brendan Schaub, sorry, I spit on the desk here. Brendan Schaub is the only guy on his podcast being like, yo, what was up with his team? Good question. Right. What was up with them?
Because it reflects on Antonio. Like, to go in there, I thought about this too. While it was happening, I was like, man, this is a black guy for the guys who are cornering him, the guys who are behind him, the guys who are touting him. You can't do that. If your guy is in that shape, what does that say about you as a coach if you're out there saying, like, man, he's packing. We're putting on a ruse. We're sandbagging you a little bit. We're not really showing you what he's really doing behind the scenes. That's basically what they were saying before this fight. That they were, when the cameras are there, they're showing you one thing to kind of dupe you into thinking that he can't do it,
or that they were just lying to themselves. I firmly believe in this sport, people just lie to themselves. They just say, you know what? Maybe it's not looking great on sparring day. He'll turn it on fight night. The Chuckable will turn it on.
I think there was a hope
They don't
that
think
way.
that they're acting in any kind of unfair way. They think that they're really, hey, I'm helping this guy.
Good indication when your original guy, John Hackleman, is like staying at as far a distance as he possibly could. You know what I mean? From that fight. That should have been,
John for doing that, because when you're coaching a fighter, you're putting your name there. You're in some ways responsible for that fighter's performance inside of the cage, because they're the ones who trained them. So the Chuck situation, I think it involves all parties. It's not just the commission. It's not just Golden Boy. There's so much more to it, and I think that's when we start to get. We're going to have to ask these bigger questions, like, okay, who's responsible for this? And I think it's a collective decision.
Why? Last question on this, because we got to move along. Why do we have such a hard time saying no in MMA? We have a fighter who turns around and says to her corner, "I'm done." No, you're not. Well, we have a guy who applies for a license. No, you're good to go. We won't say no to you. We just cannot say
no. It's always at one level some person is going to say yes. It's a lot of times it's money. Obviously, Golden Boy. My problem with it was that Golden Boy, it felt like, Oscar de la Hoya didn't even know who his legends were. He was not pronouncing Chuck Liddell. It was like he didn't really know who they were, other than they had names, and at one point they had a rivalry. And okay, wait, let's brush off these relics, put them there, and let's see what happens. And when you have that kind of opportunism jumping in, I feel like you're always going to run into the same old thing. Everybody, see, the thing was, anybody who cared about those fighters was watching it like through their fingers because you're like, you care about Chuck Liddell. You cover him long enough, you care about his health. You don't want to see Chuck Liddell take any more beatings. It was the same with Tito Ortiz for a long time. Obviously, he's had kind of a resurrection, but he's getting the kind of matchups he's getting, it's a little different, you know, but obviously. But all these guys you care. BJ Penn, what is so hard about it? We care about BJ Penn. You've talked about him for so long. These guys who jump in the game, they don't care about these guys. They don't even know who they are. They just get in the game for money. So a lot of times it's that. I mean, when corners don't want to step in and do, you know, help their guys out, that's a whole different issue. But I think it's just naked opportunism, really, for Golden Boy especially.
I agree with Chuck. Yeah.
I mean, not much more to say about that than that. All right, so let's jump to what's some of the good news. Wow, 4 events this weekend. Now, you know what? I'm going to call it like 3.5 because I don't know what to make of the one in Italy. It's I'm not here to demean the event. I'm sure it's a fine event, but it's like half kickboxing, half MMA, and it's a lot of names you probably, I think most hardcores probably wouldn't know. There's a couple good fights on it. Hesdy Gurgis is on the Bellator card, and I think it's 211, as well as Alessio Sakara, so that's fine.
I real quick on that. Do you like these hybrid, like the hybrid kickboxing and MMA things? At this point, I feel like they just,
insofar as they're in Italy, couldn't bother me less.
Yeah,
it's when they do like the thing is, I miss the Dynamite shows because they were tinkering with the format. Remember when I was there when they had the cage and the ring, and it was cool, man. It was cool, but like, did it work out in the end? It was a little long. It was a little rough. So I think they would still like to tinker with the format. It's just pretty clear that kickboxing. It's a European thing, man. I guess it's a European thing. I don't know. I wish it wasn't, but it is. Or it's a gym sport here. It's like, hey, are you a 25 or 28-year-old attorney? Need to lose weight? Go down to your local Muay Thai gym and then bow. In any event, so that's a fine event. It's whatever. But the bigger one for Bellator is Bellator 210. You got UFC Adelaide and the Ultimate Fighter. Let's work a little bit backwards. Let's start with the Ultimate Fighter finale for 28. Let me ask this question, and I know I say this every season. I am not here to belabor the point. We can just have a quick opinion about it, and we can move on. But for real, I cannot think of a more invisible season of the Ultimate Fighter than this one. I can't even name. And the one guy who fought on the Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series, I think his name was Parisian or something. Parisian. He won his fight, but they didn't give him a contract. They just put him on the Ultimate Fighter. Okay, that guy. He was good. Anything else? Yeah. I cannot tell you. Yeah. And here's the thing. You could say, well, it's you, Luke. I don't see none of y'all talking about it either. No. What has happened? Am I wrong? Am I right? Is my assessment right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's over. It's just been the Ultimate Fighter has been overplayed, and we've talked about this at length already. It's just.
Did you watch any episode?
I didn't.
Can you name anyone on it?
Yeah, sure. Actually, Michel Batista, I wrote a long feature about him when he was just starting his MMA career. He's a heavyweight. He wrestled Daniel Cormier in their one-on-one in wrestling.
Oh, okay.
Actually, they were supposed to face at the Olympics in Beijing. But that's when Cormier had that infamous wake up, and then he never got that third that trilogy. And when I interviewed him going into MMA, he's like, "Oh, I want Daniel Cormier." Okay. And that's before Daniel Cormier hopped to heavyweight. Right. And he's Cuban. He defected, to the U.S. and whatnot.
Where's he technically a resident of? He's a U.S. resident.
Yeah, he's in Miami now.
Of course.
Of course. Yeah. Where else would he? So yeah. Other than that, that's why I know him. I know one of the finalists, Espino, I believe is his last name.
Sure. He
trains out of ATT. He's from Spain.
I'm not saying the fighters aren't good. I'm just saying that the reason why, if you guys have been watching this series that John Boyce and, the other gentleman's name escapes me now. He goes by Your Logic on Twitter. It's phenomenal. Basically, the argument of like the Ultimate Fighter is that it came about at a time when culturally they needed this kind of entertainment, but they don't need this kind of entertainment.
Also, culturally, TV was a big deal back then. Everybody watched television. The only times you really went online was to maybe look at a YouTube video here and there, but most of the watch time came from television. Nowadays, I don't even have cable.
And more specifically, reality TV was just in its boom period at that moment. So it made sense because you're looking at this extreme sport where these guys are living in the same house. They're throwing them, what could be more combustible? Throw these guys in, throw alcohol in the mix. It was really fun back in the day, but it has been dead for years and years and years. And yet we keep getting hitched to this dying horse. It's like we just keep going with it. And from a standpoint of us guys who cover this sport, at some point, that these 6-figure contracts are just garbage, right? Most fighters are like, no way in hell I would do that show. There's no way I'd go that route. knowing that stuff, doesn't that sort of take away from the illustrious prize at the end? You know what I mean? Like, once you kind of put each piece together, you're like, wow, this is completely outdated on just about every level. So, do I like the fights? I like the fights when they get to when they mean something at the end. So there's a lot of guys, they have to it's a weeding out process between who belongs there. That's old. But when they finally get to the point where they've sifted it all out and there's some new faces coming in, I'm interested in that point. So you know what I mean?
Let's talk about the card. At the top of it, you have Rafael dos Anjos trying to come back from the Colby Covington loss, taking on Kamaru Usman. I had Usman on MMA Hour a while ago, and he was saying, you know what, it's destiny. I'm going to get in this fight, this welterweight as an alternate. And of course, it never happened. They never needed him. Right. That was for Till and Woodley. So here he is trying to get back on the horse. It's a super interesting fight, Chuck. What do you make of it? You've got this guy in RDA who's seen the mountaintop, trying to recapture it, had a great run last year, I believe. Yeah. And came up short against Colby. And he's got another wrestler to take on here. Is he going to learn from it? What do you make of this whole contest?
I think he will learn from it, but it remains to be seen. This is a hell of a wrestler he's going against, man. And I honestly think that Usman is that guy that probably nobody wants to face. But I feel like RDA has been in these situations so often where he's taken on somebody with a head of steam or somebody who's just been destroying guys. If anything else, he always lays a blueprint for the next guy. You know what I mean? Because he gets in there and takes the first bullet, and does this stuff. But I do think that he will have, I think he's such an underrated guy, very smart. He knows when to press. He knows when to do these things. I feel like he's going to be a little bit harder of a matchup for Usman in this fight, just given those things. I'm actually really interested in it. I'm glad that fight. Would you pay attention to the card if this fight wasn't at the top of it? I mean, I feel like to me, that's one of those great fights that should be on a co-main of a pay-per-view or something like that. To me, it has that kind of fireworks to it. But every time I count out RDA, that's what I like. Every time I've counted him out, he shows up and he really looks good. So if he keeps his trajectory going, I feel like we got something in store.
Yeah, when RDA is on, it's hard to beat that guy. I'm more interested on this fight, more on the Kamaru Usman side of things, because Usman has been this guy that everyone's been avoiding. He's been fighting these mid-level welterweights. Really, the only high-profile fight that he got was the short notice bout that Damian Maia stepped in for. And we know Damian Maia, a very skilled fighter, but you can make a case that in his latest run, all of a sudden, he's been taking a lot of losses. So I don't want to discredit that from Usman. Picking up a win over Damian Maia is definitely big. But this is his second fight where he actually gets another world-class opponent. I'm really curious to see how he does against RDA. So I think Usman is great, and I think he's got a really tough test in front of him. And, he's finally getting these guys that are at the very top. So it's a solid test, and I'm really curious.
Forever he was complaining, all these guys who have numbers next to their name, they don't want to fight me. Well, now he's finally climbing the ranks where they can't avoid him anymore. Also of note on this Ultimate Fighter card, what actually makes it pretty good is it's filled with people who won from the Contender Series. Antonina Shevchenko was on this card. I forget his first name, but Shabazian, this guy who I know he trains with Edmund Tarverdian, but he appears to be a very good fighter. He's going to be on this card and some other ones as well. The whole card is filled with actually some pretty good talent in that regard.
I think on that card, Pedro Munoz is fighting Brian
Caraway. Yep.
That's a fantastic
the co-main.
Fight.
In the co-main.
Two great grapplers.
So that's an interesting one. Then you go to UFC Adelaide the following day. Let's talk about Mark Hunt here for a second. Man, this is going to be his, in all likelihood, his very last fight in the UFC. Chuck, what is Mark Hunt, if this is his last one, win or lose, I don't think it changes much. What is his UFC legacy?
Very complicated is what it is. Because he's a guy who they basically inherited from the whole Pride deal, you know what I mean? So they didn't even really want him. He starts off with a loss, wasn't it, against McCorkle?
Yes.
Starts off with a loss. I mean, to talk about a resurrection story, that's one of the craziest ones ever. So he goes on this run, he becomes a fan favorite, a national treasure, out there in New Zealand and Australia. I feel like they really love him. And, I mean, he has some of the biggest knockouts in UFC history. I mean, the guy has done some crazy things, but obviously, he brought cheating to light in ways that he will not let it go. He's going to continue to do that. So then this other one, there's this shadow area that he operates in that I think the UFC is probably like, man, we can't wait to get rid of him again. You know what I mean? Because each time, instead of promotion, he's bringing up Brock Lesnar. The lawsuit is brought up again. So I think at some point, it's a toxic relationship. But for a guy who they inherited, they want to get rid of to make the career he did in the UFC, and you know, some of the casualty list is pretty strong for him, man. He had a lot of main events. He helped him in many cases. If you look at it in time, I think it'll look really good. But right now, it's just very complicated.
Yeah, it is very complicated. But dare I say, Mark Hunt. Right, Artem Lobov is known as the greatest fighter to have a 50-50 record.
Are you seriously?
Mark Hunt is 13-13, man, and talk about losses being setbacks. Not for that guy. Within a 13-13 record, he fought. He became a huge name. He headlined how many cards? He fought for a title. He's been a top 10 heavyweight for how many years? Yeah. I mean, the guy knows how to bounce back from a loss, and he's done it in incredible fashion. How many times have we been like, after that knockout, the Fabricio Werdum flying knee knockout looked devastating. And then he comes back and picks up amazing wins. That guy's just relentless. Even in the whole lawsuit, that guy's just relentless. He hasn't stopped, and I don't think he will. I think fans will remember him a lot for that.
He's like 44 years old. I mean, it's pretty crazy, man. Yeah. It's so improbable.
And he still looks good out there.
I think folks forget why is he so on the cheating issue? What does it all mean? People forget when he came into the UFC, so before the McCorkle fight, if I'm not mistaken, he had lost 5 in a row at that point.
Yeah, he had.
Including, I think he got submitted by Gegard Mousasi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Folks forget that. Like, he was losing to middleweights, okay? And then he loses to McCorkle in not great fashion. I think he got mounted and, key locked, which is not what you should be losing with at that level of the game. And then he kind of just got better and got better and got better. I think what he really wanted was to say, Jesus, you know what? I am a good fighter.
Yeah.
We always knew he was a great, amazing kickboxer. But I think he was really trying to avoid territory of ending up like a Roger Gracie. Like, Roger is like the jiu-jitsu goat. I mean, the way he just ran through Buchecha in the rematch, only 2 guys to ever have 10 world championships, 5 in their weight class, 5 absolute. I mean, we're talking royalty. But he never really panned out as a fighter. He wasn't built for it. But Mark Hunt was built for it. He was trying to get good. He was trying to get better. And slowly but surely he did. And I really think that he took the steroid thing like, you know what, man? I have finally found a way to get, not quite to the mountaintop, but pretty goddamn close. And all of you bums are taking it away from me. I have a very different view of performance-enhancing drug use in sports than he does. But on some level, pardon me.
Yeah.
I understand why this means so much to him. That to me is his legacy. When he came to the UFC, he headlined in a gazillion cards in Australia.
Yeah.
He told, if his record, imagine his career ends in MMA after the Mousasi loss. Who is Mark Hunt? He's a footnote.
Right.
He came to the UFC and proved he was one of the best heavyweights in his era. Mm-hmm. That is nothing small. Not at all.
No, not at all.
Any other fight from that card got your attention? I got one. That's a bit of a deep cut, but you give me one. Just one. Interesting time.
Bam Bam Tuivasa, right?
Yes.
He's fighting
Bam
junior.
Bam?
Yeah.
You mean Bam Bam?
Bam Bam. Bam Bam in Spanish. Sorry, that's my brain.
And that's a fun one because here's the baton pass, right? You're getting one guy's last fight, handing it off to...
It's also interesting...
No, Tuivasa takes on JDS.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I thought that's what you were talking about.
Mark Hunt is going up against Big Pretty Justin Willis.
Yeah. No, I know, but I'm saying it's a baton pass in the terms of one icon over there handing it to the other.
Sorry, I misunderstood. Yep.
Because Tuivasa is obviously headlining the event. So it's like,
you're right.
One guy is taking the baton and running with it, whereas the other guy's his last
Fair enough, yeah.
So, I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
so,
Bam.
This is an interesting fight because JDS is not... it's weird. JDS is in a weird space where he kind of still in the elite, but he's kind of in that borderline. And let's forget that Tuivasa had some struggles with Andrei Arlovsky. It was a pretty competitive fight. In fact, I think I had Andrei Arlovsky winning that one. So it's a toss up. So it's still a relevant fight. Also down in that fight, Shogun Rua returns against Tyson Pedro. So probably a rough fight for him, but nonetheless.
Do people realize that Shogun is fighting this weekend? It's crazy.
Way under the radar.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this. Did you guys see the face-off between Jake Matthews and Tony Martin?
No, I didn't.
Tony Martin has been on a warpath. I forgot who he beat at UFC 229, if I'm not mistaken. He has been yelling at anybody who will listen to him. He's gotten a lot better. He really has massively improved. Bro, he is starting to let his personality shine, and I am loving every bit of it. Jake Matthews is a tough customer, but Tony Martin is is criminally underrated. Yeah. Very much looking forward to that contest.
It's actually a pretty good card. You know what I'm considering, like the little intrigues involved in the fights. Card. I think it's going to be a fun card. Heavyweight picture is going to have a different shape at the end of it. Sure.
Last thing on these the big fights over the weekend. Bellator's got the other show, Bellator 210. That's going to be with Chidi Njokuani and John Salter in your main event. They're back to Thackerville, Oklahoma. Jesus, why you'd ever want to go there is
casino, baby.
I mean, can you imagine the air quality in Thackerville? Just the amount of, secondhand.
Good golf courses.
Bad cigar smoke you have to just waft through to get to the slots. All right, but neither here nor there. The main card is okay.
Yeah. Yep.
The prelim card for Bellator 210 is really good.
Backward.
Okay, they've got on this former Olympic hopeful Sean Bunch taking on former world champion Joe Warren, number one. Joe Schilling is back full-time to MMA. He's on this prelim card. I could go down the list. There's a gazillion people. I'm not sure what I make of this. Usually what Bellator does is they say, hey, local promoter, come on over and fill our undercard for us. We'll put Bellator gloves on your guys. You pay them.
Right.
And that's how they save on cost. Question for you guys, do you think Bellator wants to now start having, legit prelims? Every once in a while they'll have a legit one. I mean, all of them.
Yeah. This is weird. Because you brought this up, and I almost didn't know. I knew that Joe Warren was on the card. I didn't realize he was a prelim.
Even he is like, why am I on the prelims?
Especially a guy like that who is Mr. Midwest and all that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, it's kind of at odds with the way that they've run their shows. So I don't know, man. I was looking at the main card of that, and I was like, why would a couple of those fights be on the main card? I feel like I'm mystified as to what the logic is behind all this. Especially Joe Schilling, too. I mean, to me, that guy has people pay attention to his fight. So it's very odd.
Yeah, it's more than that, too. I mean, I can't remember all offhand, but I was looking, Jesus.
Yamauchi's fighting,
Goichi Yamauchi.
Right? Daniel Weichel?
Yes, Weichel jumped up to lightweight.
Is that in the prelims as well? Or?
That's on the prelims, bro.
Yeah. That's the fight I have my eye on.
Yeah, it's
wild.
Every one of the prelims has a name.
23 years old.
It has a name to it. Yeah, so it's kind of
bizarre. Anyway, the only thing that bothers me about that is you can, if you miss, maybe on DAZN it's different. Can you get prelims from Bellator on DAZN? It's always been the main card you can get. Can you get the prelims?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure, but if they're not, they're going to be on Bellator.com. So
I hope.
Either way,
I hope.
You're going to get them.
All right, so let's do this then. It's time now for Under the Radar, a story that might have passed through in a week full of crazy news. It always seems that way. What's one story? It doesn't have to be the biggest story in the world. It could be something kind of small that maybe folks didn't pick up on and they should have. Chuck, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to go back to our original guy, Ponzinibbio. He gets this win, and were you going to say the same thing?
No,
okay. Dude's victory lap is ridiculous. He's getting the key to the city in La Plata, and he's they were showing him with the president of Argentina, and we talked about this a little bit, how tailoring a guy to his market could pay off like this.
Yes.
And here's a prime example. It's kind of gone under the radar in the sense that should be a big deal. The guy's we're talking about Nurmagomedov when his victory lap and all the stops he's making. It's kind of similar. He's doing all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, man, one big fight like that, one big showcase, and now he's like a national treasure out there.
Yeah. Mine also stems out of UFC Argentina. And Ricardo Lamas posted something on his social media, but I talked to him in the interview. The story already came out on MMAFighting.com. He fought at UFC Argentina with a blood clot, and he got diagnosed DVT.
No, where was the clot?
On his calf.
On his calf.
And we all know that what can happen there if it gets released. And he's lucky to be alive. He's fortunate to be alive. And right now he's taking medicine to deal with it. And he's going to be out for a month because while you're taking blood thinners, you can't do any sparring or anything like that because internal bleeding can happen very easily. So he's going to take a month of medicine and then get revalued and then come back to see if he has to take another 2 months or maybe if he can already resume his MMA career. But, it was a serious issue, man. And luckily he got by.
Dude, these guys flying, Argentina is far.
Yeah, the thing, get this. So he trains out of MMA Masters in Miami. Right. He drove from Miami to Chicago straight with a buddy of his. So sitting down the whole time, only stopped to go to the bathroom and really, tank the car. Refill it with gas. And then he got to Chicago, stayed there, I think maybe a day or two, and then got on a plane to Houston, and then from Houston to Argentina. It was like an 11-hour flight just from Houston to Argentina. And the car drive was 22 hours. So There's no telling how it happened or how the blood cut came about, but that's his guess.
I'd rather just not live than take a 22-hour car ride from my. And by the way, I don't know if you know. Did he tell you if he traveled with his bird? Do you know this?
I did not know about his bird.
He has a bird. He has birds. He has parakeets but like not parakeets. What are the big ones that talk and stuff?
Parrots?
Parrots. Yeah, he's got a parrot that talks. He takes it with him on the road trips.
Oh, really?
It talks to him. Yeah. People don't know about Ricardo Lamas. He loves birds, bro.
Did not
crazy.
know that.
That's cool.
For my under the radar, this came from our own MMA Fighting's Guilherme Cruz, Brave FC. I think that's their full name. They're dropping 170, going to 165, 175. Wow. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Brave, I could be wrong about this, I think this is the organization that also takes points when you miss weight before the fight even starts.
Right.
So they're out there experimenting. Good. Maybe this is a good answer. Maybe it's a bad answer. I don't know. But here's what I know. We're not going to figure out what the right answer is until organizations like this get out there and try it. More
Living
of
up
that.
to their name. Brave. Brave and bold.
Thank you, Dad Joke Mindenhall. All right.
That was a good one.
There's a bunch of stuff we didn't even get to on the rundown. We don't have time. So what we do have time for, though, is what we call After the Beat, where we take your questions, comments, bitches, gripes, and smart-ass remarks using the hashtag the MMA Beat. We have assembled a list of them. We're going to answer them now. So don't go anywhere. This portion of the show is over. The next portion of the show begins. Time now for After the Beat. All right, welcome back. After the Beat here, Luke Thomas, Danny Segura, and Iceman Mindenhall there at the end of the table, the man in the hat. Welcome back. We appreciate you joining us. As I mentioned before, we take your questions using the hashtag the MMA Beat. Thank you for everyone who submitted them. I'm going to say this again because this appears to be a bit of an ongoing challenge for our awesome viewing audience. Please try to pick questions about topics we're not necessarily going to get to on the show. That can be a little unpredictable, but I do list out some of them in the post. Try to avoid those because I won't be able to pick them. We have to pick things we did not get to. All right, boys. There we go.
Let's try it.
We got a nice mix of, what do you want to say? Good and idiotic.
All right.
Okay.
My favorite kind of thing.
Right in your wheelhouse.
That is exactly the sweet spot.
That's right.
Okay, let's go to the first one, please. All right, you go first, Danny. Anyone on the panel watching Wilder versus Fury on Saturday? Thoughts or predictions?
I will be watching, and that's a tough one. Yeah. I don't know. I think Wilder has had a lot of advantages over his opposition, being more athletic, younger,
powerful,
and just powerful. But man, Fury's just as big, and I think Fury's a lot, far more technical. Wilder, he's a bit wild with his punches, and I don't know. But Fury has had a long layoff, has been through a lot. This is a very tough one. I don't know which way it's gonna go. I'm not as educated in boxing as I am in MMA, so maybe my prediction doesn't hold too much weight. But I'm gonna go with Tyson Fury.
All right, Tyson Fury. What about you, bud?
The king.
I'll definitely be watching it. I've gotten more and more into this fight as it's gotten closer, man. And maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit.
I love this fight.
Yeah, I love the fight, and but there's something about Wilder, man. Maybe it's just the American heavyweight who we haven't seen an American champion, the heavyweight champion in a while. Maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid. Maybe it's a backstory. Grew up in Alabama and all the things he's kind of gone through to get here. But I kind of sense an upset here. Not just more of a gut instinct on it. But either way, man, I like that we finally have something that's kind of fun like this again. Like it's been a while that I've cared about a heavyweight boxing match like this. Wow.
This is one of those fights where you look out there and you say, man, Showtime, you can tell they wanted to promote the balls off of this fight.
Yeah.
The multiple press conferences, the all access. Dude, those guys, Fury and Wilder, they did so much media for this. Scrums and workouts. Wilder was on my show. Fury was supposed to be on. He just duffed on all of SiriusXM, which was kind of funny. And then Wilder duffed on DJ Woo Kid. Sorry, DJ. But anyway, they did everything. Those guys went to the ends of the earth to promote this. And even yesterday, you had Esther Lynn rising above the fray
to her.
because Tyson Fury's taking his clothes off at a presser yesterday. Dude, it's been an unbelievable. If you haven't seen the All Access on Showtime, they put them all for free on YouTube. I highly recommend it. It's funny. I was telling Chuck this before the show. The guy who does the boxing show at SiriusXM is gentleman Jerry Cooney. And he's a big man. And he was like, oh, what do you think, Luke? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I kind of think Fury for all the reasons, basically. They used to. He's like, oh no, man, he's like, Wilder's going to knock him out. I'm like, really? Like, isn't all the money coming in on Fury? He was like, bro. He says bro like 8 times. bro. He's like, what's going to happen is, this was his prediction, that Fury, the layoff, he doesn't buy that he can make a full comeback, number one. Yeah. Not even with a tune-up. It's just not possible. And then number 2, Fury does have good movement, but it's a little herky-jerky and his hands are way down. He doesn't stay gloved up. And he thinks that Wilder, while not as good of a boxer as Fury is just all he needs is 1 or 2 of those opportunities and the fight can turn on a dime.
It's funny because it does have shades of Cooney Holmes from back in '81, like back in the day when HBO was like doing their stuff. Like it has sort of a feel to that. I know you had no idea about that, but but back then, man, I mean that was a big deal. Yeah. Cooney actually had his moment at that.
He really did. Anyway, so it's like, a heavy puncher, but not quite as good of a boxer versus a very good boxer, but all kinds of questions around him.
Undefeated, both guys.
Yeah, but both guys huge, dynamic personalities. I love this fight. I really can't wait for it.
Joshua in the
waiting in the wings. Yeah.
So that's what's always fun too.
So no matter what, especially if it's Fury, but the call out after whoever gets the microphone from Jim Gray, bro, it's going to be epic. Yeah. It's going to be epic. And by the way, Paulie Malignaggi, your favorite, is going to be calling the fights. Dude, he's a great boxing commentator.
He is.
I know fans can't stand him, but he's like legitimately awesome at that. So that should be kind of fun. All right, next. Chuck, what are y'all's thoughts so far on Jon Boyce and Felix, that's his name, Felix Bitterman's Fighting in the Age of Loneliness, and were any of you involved in the project? To my knowledge, none of us were. No. Have you boys watched it?
I have not watched it yet.
Oh!
Have you?
Yes. Oh, well, there's 5 parts. They've only released 3. I've seen all 3. Okay. Remember, boys, remember.
I want to watch it. I just haven't done it yet.
You are just a millennial, clueless, and you have kids. I have roughly per month, on average, let's say somewhere around 60 hours of train time a month. I got a lot of time to kill on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, the answer is I've seen all 3 of the first. You guys haven't seen it?
No, I saw the first 30 minutes of
the first one.
The first one. I actually saw it before it was out.
Oh, okay, very good. Yeah. Did you like that one?
Yes, I loved it. I thought it was great. I think they do a really good job at telling it how it is. Yes. That's something me and John were talking about because he's like, we were just exchanging ideas and we're just talking and he's like, I want you to check this out. It appeals more for the casuals, but
That's right.
I want you to check it out. And I saw it, and obviously I'm a hardcore. I know a lot about MMA. And watching it, I'm like, everything seems accurate. Cool. Like, there's nothing that it's told differently or under a certain light. Everything's pretty factual, and they tell it how it is.
Let me tell you what I think the benefit of it is. There's a lot of them. I had mentioned that they sort of set the economic and cultural zeitgeist context for why fighting evolved in the way that it did in the era in which it took place. In the world of Reagan, in the world of Bush, or in Japan with inflation and everything. So how did it happen at this time that it did? But there's something else that really always appealed to me. One of the things I like to do is sometimes I get to go and talk about stick and ball sports in my other job. I got to do it the day after Thanksgiving, covering for Adam Shine on his show. And I always bring a bit of a different perspective because my sensibilities are shaped by combat sports. Right? I like it when the reverse happens. I like it when other people talk about combat sports with the one caveat being they have to have done their homework. Yeah. Well, these guys did all their homework.
They did.
They bring a completely different sensibility to what you are accustomed to seeing. You will always learn something new about MMA when someone outside of MMA does their homework about MMA and then talks to you about MMA. They have a very different perspective. I can't recommend it more. Yeah.
Can't wait to see it.
Yeah, you'll love it.
Anything John has done, I mean, like, in the past has always been good. So, I mean, just knowing that, I was like,
Frankly, I'll be honest, I'm not overly familiar with his work, but if this is my intro... Oh, he did a Kaepernick video I liked a lot. Yeah. If this is my introduction, then I like what I've seen so far. Yeah. So there you go. Cool. Good job on that one. Next. Okay, boys, what's the best advice you've ever received? Conversely, what's the worst? Let's start with the first. Best advice you've ever received. I told you some of these were really bad.
Oh, man, Jesus. I remember asking Nate Diaz one time what the best advice he ever received from Nick, and he said, "Don't get no girl pregnant," which I always loved.
You know what? Wear a rubber.
That was early on.
Wear a rubber.
Man, I don't know. That's a toughie. Anything spring to mind for you?
Well, you boys are just dullards. You can't come up.
You throw these like philosophical, like, hey,
And also,
This is a challenge.
Hey.
This is a challenge for you two to think on your feet. What's your favorite movie? You mean in English, in black and white, made this year? No, just answer the question.
Films are different.
No one is going.
To be fair, you get to see his questions hours before we do. So
Do you sit there and I think I think about that?
Of
I just
course.
saw a weird question. I just selected it.
Saver. I don't know.
Just answer the question. Just give me a piece of advice.
I'll say something.
All right, thank you.
My grandpa always, told me, Daniel, procure ser el mejor en todo. Means always try to be the best at everything. And the translation is not 100% right because try would be intentar. Procure is like a constant state of being. And he's just like, yeah, like if you're tying his shoes, like make sure, you do the best possible job that you can do. Like everything that you do, just try to be the best at it, Even if you don't succeed, just to have that mentality.
Make an effort, yeah.
And that's something that I carry, in everything that I do. I might not be the best at everything, but I'm surely trying to be the best version that I can be. So
Very good. See? Look at that. Huh? Amazing. Good job. I like that.
Man,
All right, Iceman.
Shea Serrano once told me to shoot your shot. Shoot your shot.
shot,
He didn't tell me directly. He just put it out on a tweet, but I took it kind of personally, so.
All right.
I really don't know.
works.
I'm looking back and I'm like, I don't know. I'm sure
You
there has
can't
been.
think of anything that someone ever said to you that was insightful or
I
helpful
can't
in
remember
any
a
way.
profound moment where.
I'm not asking you to recite what a conversation was at the DMV that you had.
Well, it'd have to be profound enough for me to carry it to today's show, but I don't have one.
Hi, my name's Chuck Mindenhall. I've never learned anything from anyone ever.
I've gotten a lot of bad advice.
All right. How about some bad advice?
We're calling it though off the top of my head.
Fucking Lord.
Well, let's hear yours. You picked the question.
Well, bad advice could be like, yeah, I could have another beer. I've had that a few times. Good advice. What is a piece of good advice? Here's one. Following your dreams is mostly BS. Not entirely. It's not entirely true. Here's the truth about following your dream. Because everyone's like, oh, my dream is to be in MMA media. You're not built for it then. The problem with MMA media is everyone wants to put their arm around the game. And the game literally has people putting their arm around dictators. If you want to put your arm around the game, you are complicit in that. I do have a degree of hostility towards the sport. I have much more love for it, but I have a little bit of both. If you're approaching this strictly from a perspective of, oh my God, I love MMA so much, you will be complicit in the worst kinds of humanity. So you're not built for this. Don't follow your dreams is also bad advice. What I would say to you is, find things where you're willing to work hard. And that will likely be a place where you have some success in, or that you like, right? But find a place where you do not have to manufacture the will, like, oh, today I have to get up and go type those reports, or today I have to get up and whatever. If it's that much work, you're also not built for it. But just translating your absolute dire love of something into a project can be fine. But for a lot of people, it doesn't end up well. It could end up being a contribution to the problem. Find something where where working hard is never a challenge.
That might be the best advice I've ever received.
Yeah, well, apparently the only one.
So now you want to recite what he said?
So one time Luke told me. Thank you.
Can you believe these zilches that I'm stuck with? What's your favorite burger? What do you mean what's my favorite burger?
Veggie burger, turkey burger, regular. I mean, you gotta specify, man. Come on.
I'm trying to think of the worst career advice I had ever was, what's the worst career advice I ever had? That's a tough one because it's all been bad. That's true. That's when you're like sifting through piles of bad advice. No, I don't know. Everything else is bad. There you go. Find something where working hard is easy, and then go from there. All right, next. Okay, during the I'll go to you, Danny, because I saw your tweet about this. During the Liverpool PSG game, the camera turned to only 3 people in the crowd during the game: Mick Jagger,
Mick who?
Yes, Leonardo DiCaprio, and then Habib. By the way, Habib calling the game perfectly, quite literally.
Yes.
In a crowd which included football legends and other celebrities. Does this show Habib is now mainstream? What do you make of that?
I think so, man. I mean, the fight with Conor McGregor was huge, right? Mm-hmm. Probably one of the biggest fights in UFC history. I think he is, and I think for Habib, he's been a big soccer fan. I know he's a Real guy, unfortunately.
He is a Real guy, yes, because he's smart.
Right. How was last weekend's game?
Good, just fine.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, did you see us at Roma winning the group? Suck it, loser.
Okay. Anyways, so yeah, I do think Khabib has crossed, pop culture. I really noticed this when, I follow, and probably a lot of people do too. I follow on Instagram this account called Hood Clips, and it's basically just memes. And then they were throwing memes out there of Khabib.
I do not follow Hood Clips.
It's an amazing account, and they were just throwing memes of Khabib like wrestling with a bear and like a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
I feel like he has kind of crossed, pop culture, especially over in Europe as well. Yeah, I do think Khabib has crossed into mainstream.
I think that one of the big questions going into this fight was, would it transfer if he won? Or would he be considered like an icon killer? Or how would it, would it
be another Rousey Nunes situation?
Yeah, one of those situations. We weren't sure. He was obviously a little bigger, I think, than some of the other names going into the fight. People kind of knew him a little bit, but I think that he kind of had this reputation as like this cold-blooded, wrestler. Well, we saw just how icy his veins really are, and I felt like that translated. I feel like now we look at him as something imposing in the fight game collectively, rather than just us people in the bubble. And his sense of conviction on these things, I think, has also made him like really big. Yeah. I wasn't sure at the time, but now I'm pretty convinced that he's crossed over. It'd be really interesting to see if he's not fighting Conor McGregor, whoever he fights, what happens on his next fight. How big will it seem?
Also, I thought for a second that, this is me downing the size of MMA. Since I'm in the bubble, they were showing shots and it'd be DiCaprio, right? Habib in there. So I thought,
they weren't together, right? Like those guys weren't in the same. They were in the
separate
areas.
No, they were in the same shot. They were nearby each other. Okay. They were like maybe a row.
Like but they weren't like this.
No.
Okay.
So they were showing a bigger shot, and I thought it was to highlight DiCaprio. And I'm like, oh wait, is that Habib? And then they would go to single shots to Habib. So I'm like, okay, yeah.
That does speak volumes, though, right? Like, because Mick Jagger obviously being like who he is, and DiCaprio being who he is, and now Nurmagomedov.
I mean, the PSG official account interviewed him and had a prediction of him, which he was completely.
Do you know PSG?
Paris Saint-Germain.
It's Paris Saint-Germain. It's the biggest club in France. Big time star. Neymar. You ever heard of Neymar?
Yeah.
Neymar plays there.
Great actor, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Angel Di Maria plays there. Like big time footballers. Mbappe plays there. Like the guy who was like the best guy at the World Cup. He plays there. And so the account for that, dude, their gear is all made by the Jordan brand. Okay, they're the first soccer team to do that. Their official account had Habib, and they were interviewing him. And dude, Habib was like, I think PSG is going to win 2-1 against a very good Liverpool team. And they did. They won 2-1.
And he's like, yeah, you can ask me anything. I know everything about soccer. I know.
And he does. Yeah. He goes, I can tell you who's on the French 1998 World Cup team. Yeah. And I believe him. I believe him.
I did not know that about him.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
He was a fanatic like that.
Yeah, and he met, this was long before the McGregor fight, but he met with Cristiano Ronaldo last season.
Yeah.
When he was still with Madrid, and they did a jersey swap, and they took pictures and shit.
He was taking selfies with Gigi Buffon after the game.
Did he really?
Yeah.
No way. I didn't know that.
Well, all that's going to translate very well for Nurmagomedov. You know what I mean? Because that's such a huge cultural thing. So.
And it's like turns him into like a bit of a global star to a degree.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to say, Habib I don't even like PSG, but that's a big ass team, man. And then you got, you got Conor going to the Dallas Cowboys, a team full of a team full of losers and vagrants. Let's just be real about it. By the way, to my previous point, saw a lot of people sharing the picture of Habib doing the stuff in Kenya, or I think it was with the Wells, which is an amazing, amazing thing. Didn't see a lot of pictures outside of certain people's accounts about him meeting with Kadyrov, which I know is a complicated topic. Yeah. He might have to do it for his own personal safety. I'm just saying, back to the previous point, maybe not everyone's cut out for this job. Yeah. All right, next. Let's see. Okay, this question I didn't like, but there was a part of it I liked. Will we see any organizations push back against the UFC's pay-per-view social media model and try to maintain the integrity of a proper martial arts ranking system, at least not be as obvious in easy promoted cash grabs, perhaps? I think we're trending in a weird direction. Okay, I brought this up because the answer is obviously PFL, right?
Yeah. Right.
They just have a system where it's like, here's the bracket, fight through it.
Yep.
And Bellator tried it as well. We've had this debate a million times about Bellator and pay-per-view and tournaments and the value. And I think we all kind of agree. Every once in a while, tournaments can be pretty great. So why bring up this question? The issue for me is, why do people believe, because they do, that the matchmaker model is broken? It's like every piece of evidence, there are cases where stars got launched from tournaments.
Yeah.
For the most part, they don't. And for the most part, they don't with the matchmaker model either. But if you look at the vast majority of stars who have ever been stars in MMA, the overwhelming majority came from the matchmaker model. And yet, there is more skepticism about the matchmaker model than there is about anything else.
Yeah.
Now, why is that?
I think a lot of the skepticism comes from the new era of fans that, you know, are only exposed to the matchmaking system. But if you go back and you're like, all right, well, I want you to sit through and watch the very early Bellator tournaments.
Yeah.
You tell me if that's a better model. You know, I'm sure they would have a different opinion on that matter. And the fact is, the tournament is nice once you got elite fighters, but to groom prospects, the tournament format is horrible, right? Because they need the proper matchmaking. They need proper opponents. So for sure, for a health standpoint, the matchmaking system, you know, caters and grooms certain aspects, and then the tournament does others. I think the combination is the best. But, you know, back to your example, the only thing that we're really exposed nowadays is really the matchmaking one, which has been based a lot of popularity. But man, if you go back and watch the tournaments, I'm sure, you know, you'll have a different opinion.
I mean, one of the original endearing things about the UFC was that there was no place to hide. If you were a good fighter going up, you were going to have to face, there was no mercy. They were trying to knock you off. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like they put the best and the best momentums against the best momentums. To me, that's the only model. I mean, I like the tournaments, but if you're talking about running an organization, the only sustainable model is the matchmaking one. It's mostly done right. I think that in this new era of, like, you know, the new ownership and everything, maybe there has been some favoritism. Maybe there has been some, like, hey, well, let's put these guys a bigger fight. You know, there's been a little bit of that. It gets more and more prevalent. But at the same time, you know, they just booked Israel Adesanya against Anderson Silva. Why are they doing that? Well, it makes sense, I think. We never got to this topic earlier, but it makes sense on a lot of levels. It makes sense for the guy at the two ships passing in the night. Sense. I like that.
Chuck's a smart man.
See, now I realize we would have had a conflict if we had talked about this earlier. But
yeah, I know. I need more arguments.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I personally like it because you have the guy who's the original Matrix Sublime striker going against the new one. You know what I mean? And it's kind of two ships passing in the night. But you know, I just think that the matchmakers, they consider a lot. You know what I mean? They consider a lot of factors, more so these days. But I've always loved that basically the two best guys are supposed to be facing each other. They're always on a collision course, and I feel like that's the matchmakers. You know, it could be in a tournament, but you got to have both those guys in the tournament, right? Or you got to have. It doesn't sustain itself that way. That's it.
That's all I got.
You just love this idea of Israel Adesanya and Anderson Silva.
It. Yes, I think it makes.
Were you guys talking about it on Monday?
Y'all are going to be epically disappointed.
We did discuss it a little bit on Monday.
If that's the case, though, it's as long as Anderson Silva doesn't look like Chuck Liddell, I'm like, it's a showcase fight for Adesanya.
He's so far from that.
No, I know.
I don't think anyone is prescribing that. We're saying that would be a worst case scenario, which I think we're pretty far from. I would agree with that.
That wouldn't be nice to watch.
I expect it to be competitive for a time and then not, and then we're all be like, oh, right, that's what that was about. I mean, I still think that, like, Adesanya, to me, he is the most exciting talent for me inside MMA today, right?
I agree with you.
That is where I rank him, which means now is the time to see exactly how good he is, which Jacare doesn't want to do it. I get it. Okay, fine. At least not on the timeline. Because
I would have preferred to see that fight.
But the Silva fight, it's like, do any of us really think that the outcome is, like, tough to figure out? MMA's crazy. If Silva wins, that would not be the craziest win. I recognize it. Everyone's going to rub this in my face if he wins. But I find that to be extraordinarily unlikely.
Yeah.
I mean, can you say the same thing when Silva went up to fight, was it James Irvin, right, or Stephan Bonner? Like,
he was the favorite when he fought both of those guys.
Silva?
Yes.
Okay, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like,
that's what you're saying? Adesanya will be the favorite by a country mile.
The matchmaking shouldn't be based just strictly on, it's got to be even on the odds or anything. We've seen mismatches on the...
Part of me, there's how would you explain it? Like a nostalgia, but it's not quite like that. It's just, you never got to see Anderson Silva in some of the crazy matchups that you always wanted to see. GSP, Jon Jones, the guys like that. It's like sort of like at the tail end of it, you're seeing him against a guy on the rise. It kind of fills a weird need with him in his career that I'm like, maybe had not felt satisfied before, because he was fighting guys, you know, like Patrick Cote and people like that. He was not getting the guys that you wanted to see him against, you know. So in one way, it's sort of like...
That's a good point.
it's almost like you're retroactively looking at it and thinking like, well, now he's going to fight this guy who's very exciting for his style.
Yeah.
But I know what you're saying. If you look at it from Adesanya's perspective, you're like, dude, he should crush the old man. You know what I mean?
We crush him with impunity.
Yeah.
I mean, here's the thing. It's like, do I get why the fight is being made? Yes, of course I do. I still think there's a bit of an issue about how much star power he has left to give to somebody who beats him. I think Weidman took a lot of that, so there's still a bit of an issue there, but not totally, because the Nick Diaz fight I thought was a pretty important fight for both those guys. Okay, fine. So it shows you put two dynamic figures together, you can get something interesting. And I get that star making is alchemy. I get that too. I get it. But at 29 versus 43, it's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to. I don't know why I'm supposed to feel giddy about this.
We're also thinking like 43 sounds old, right, for a fighter. I mean, that's how old Tito Ortiz is.
43 is old.
It is. But let's keep in mind that Anderson Silva is not a guy that peaked in his 20s. This is a guy that peaked in his 30s. He really got good once he was close to 40s. I mean, he was still champion late in his 30s.
Yeah, but there are questions surrounding that now with the issues he had with anti-doping.
Yeah, for sure. But he was also a guy that was in, unlike Chuck Liddell, who was known as a brawler and a really physical fighter, he was known for his technique. So this is not someone that his prime was, God knows how long. Anderson Silva, I still think, and I stand by this, he has a bit of a bad image out there. He's actually more competitive than what actually people make him out to be. I still think he's a top 15 middleweight. Top 15 middleweight versus Israel Adesanya? Sign me up.
Maybe that was basically his way of sending him to the glue factory, man. Like, they're just saying, like, this is it.
That's a horrible way to put it. Jesus.
It's a win-win either way. I think if Adesanya loses, it's not a big setback, and then now all of a sudden you got the star back with Anderson Silva.
Also, Silva will get a title fight.
Yeah.
I mean,
that'll do well. Yeah.
Crazy.
Well, he says.
Okay. I mean, yes, the UFC can obviously withdraw that offer, but still, in theory, it's like, wow, it's kind of crazy. All right, next. God, you guys are going to love this one. What is a recent book, movie, TV show? Any of them. Doesn't have to be one of each, just something you recently watched or read that you would recommend. Any kind of book, movie, or TV show recommendation. Any of them. I mean, we couldn't give you a bigger layup.
I just read Bernard Malamud's Magic Barrel. He's written The Natural. He's written a lot of well-known things. This is his collection of short stories. It's just like timeless. I've read it before, but it's just like these timeless little stories, and I love that. Brian Phillips, Impossible Owls. He's a guy from The Ringer who's a really, really good writer. I read that recently. Or got that. Man, what else is out? Loose Balls about the ABA. Got that sitting on my shelf right now, ready to read.
Fun.
Yeah. Those are just some book recommendations.
Those are great. Those are great.
Yeah, I recently saw a documentary on Netflix about 7-5, it's called.
7-5?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's about a police unit in New York City in the 70s, I think, or 80s.
Jesus.
Called
when it was
7-5.
hell.
Yeah, and there was a corrupt cub that used to work with, well, I don't want to ruin it, but...
Spoiler.
No, that's not actually a spoiler because they state that out right from the front. But it's just a story of a corrupt cub that used to work in Brooklyn, back when it was horrible, and all his stories and how he became aide to one of the biggest drug traffickers. And it's just an insane story. And they interview all the parties involved, and it's a great documentary.
Wow. Cool. Okay, I will go with. I see so many people all follow this. In MMA, you get fans who all follow the same intellectual leadership, and it all mostly comes from. I found this out over time. It comes from Joe Rogan's podcast, which I have no problem with. Take leadership from wherever you can get it if it's reasonable enough, and I certainly take no issue with it. That's fine. Do all those things, but everyone's a little one note with it. Mm-hmm. So I would add to the name. I've talked about his books in the past, but he has a new one out. It's much shorter. It's only about 150 pages. The Curse of Bigness by Tim Wu. Basically, what he argues is that the industries in which we primarily rely upon in this country, including some of the most important ones like telecom, they are all consolidating. And there's tons of proof around this, by the way. He goes and lays out the case. But basically there's two problems with this. One, like everyone was like when the guy got beat on the airline, the United Airlines, when they dragged him off and they knocked his teeth out, people were like, I'm going to boycott. Here's how I know you're lying. You can't. You can't. Yes, some of you, if you live close to a hub, can take Delta. But for the most part, people want cheap tickets, and you have no choices. It's United or Spirit or American. You're going to take whatever's the cheapest one because you like your chances of not getting your teeth knocked out, right? This is just the reality of it. And so you go look at telecom, you have Google and you have Apple, and these profoundly affect the way in which you interact with the world. And more to the point, when you have consolidation of industry, you now open it up to authoritarian takeover. He is a former Supreme Court clerk, Tim Wu. He's a law professor at Columbia University here in New York City, and he's the guy who came up with the term net neutrality. So go check out The Curse of Bigness. There you go.
That does sound like a good recommendation.
Yeah, and it's an easy read. 150 pages. Yeah. You can just fire through it.
Even you could do that one.
Yeah, of course. I don't have to just watch stuff on Netflix.
All right, I think we have any more. We have one more? One more. Let's do it. All right, here we go. Which MMA fighter's life story would you most like to see be made into a biopic? Now, there are more obvious candidates, but this person says, I think Dominic Cruz movie could get someone an Oscar. Matt Hamill and Jose Aldo biopics already exist, by the way.
Well, I'll tell you what. After reading Ian Heinish's story about muling drugs, could you imagine that being made into a movie?
I spoke to him, too, on my show.
Yeah.
Wow, dude.
Yeah.
What a life.
It's got all the components.
Yeah.
of a good biopic. I think that, it's almost so improbable that it seems like,
It's one of the craziest stories I've ever heard of, and I've heard some crazy ones.
So that would be a good one.
I'm trying to think. I think after Jon Jones is done with his career, I think that'll be because it's still a lot in the air of how he'll be remembered. But
will he be remembered as a hero, you think?
I don't know.
Hero's a strong word, but
we'll have to wait and see what happens in the next few years. But I think with what's happened already, there's already there's a lot to tell there.
I mean, Cormier's too.
Yeah.
Going back to all his.
I mean, that could be one combined together.
Yeah.
Those guys are.
Yeah.
Someone, I think, replied to that tweet, and they said Chris Lieben.
Yeah.
Lieben's got a hell of a... By the way, he was out there reffing and judging.
Yeah, he was.
At Golden Boy MMA 1.
Wasn't he selling houses recently, too? Like, he's all over the place.
You know what? But he's... I wasn't surprised by that because if you've ever interviewed him, he loves teaching.
Yeah.
And I think just being a part of the game in some capacity, having a say, he really likes that. And good, because I think he'd be a competent judge and certainly a great referee. Frank Trigg's one of those guys, too. I'm trying to think of somebody else. Matt Hughes. Lee Murray. Seriously, Lee Murray.
Can you imagine?
Well, wow, that would be a great one.
I know.
How'd you end up in it's like, you get started. So I ended up in a Moroccan jail.
Yeah.
Here's how I got here.
By trying to heist $50 million.
Yeah. By trying to pull off the biggest robbery in the history of the UK. Biggest bank robbery, anyway. Is there anyone else we're not thinking of, like maybe outside? I feel like Crow Cop would have an interesting one.
Yeah. I know we're gonna you'll kick yourself because there are probably some really good ones.
I know whenever we do this and we get off, people always have amazing suggestions that we never thought of. It's always like, there's a bunch. But interesting that the Dominic Cruz one, any smaller guy that you count. That's a tougher one.
Yeah. Man,
that's hard, right?
Yeah.
Norifumi Yamamoto, perhaps.
Yeah.
Kid Yamamoto, that could be one. Because he was such a towering figure.
Definitely could be.
And then, gone too soon kind of thing.
There's so many stories in MMA, obviously, of people who came from broken something. So anything like that, obviously, is going to have
maybe Henry Cejudo.
Henry Cejudo do someone.
Yeah. Got a good story.
I don't know if it would be making for a major motion picture, but I do think if Dustin Poirier ever gets a title.
Yeah.
Bro, you ever seen the Fightville?
I did.
Yeah.
Dustin Poirier, from the trenches, that guy has raised himself.
I'd be interested in seeing the Diaz brother.
That's another good one.
You know what I mean? Just
the
to
Diaz
know.
brothers, that would be a really good one.
I mean, you could just call it Diaz. Oh my God, it'd be amazing. it'd be amazing.
Michael Moore presents.
Yeah, I don't know if he's the right candidate for that. Who's the British guy who does all the MMA documentaries? I've had him on my show, when his name escapes me.
Oh,
Bobby Razak.
Yes.
Yeah, Bobby Razak, whatever.
Yeah.
He'd be perfect for that.
Yeah.
Okay, well that does it for us. Thank you guys so much for watching. Are we back next week? I don't even know. I can't keep my life straight. My life is a disaster. So I don't know, but whatever the case, keep sending those questions and the tweets using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We really appreciate it when you do. Subscribe to MMA Fighting. Subscribe to the podcast on any kind of form. Share this with your friends. Say, hey, there's this guy who asks inane questions about your favorite movie, and the other panelists never answer. It's scintillating to listen to. All right, well, we're done here. For Chuck, for Danny, I'm Luke. Until next time, hands up, chin down, let them fly. This is the MMA Beat.